Thank you for watching this video from the Center for European Studies at Carleton University. This project has received funding from the European Union and Carleton University. The views expressed in this video do not reflect those of the European Union or the Center for European Studies. I'm Merrick Eby with the Center for European Studies at Carleton University, and I'm joined today by Bethany Hastie. Bethany is a PhD candidate at McGill University, and she's at Carleton today to deliver a lecture on migration and temporary labor in Canada and the European Union. So thank you for joining me today, Bethany. In recent years, in both Canada and several European countries, there's been a significant rise in temporary and migrant labor. While there's similarities between the process in the two contexts, there seems also to be some significant differences as well. So could you elaborate on these similarities and differences between temporary migrant labor in Canada and the European Union?
So when we look at temporary labor migration, there's a few different categories that we can look at. My work focuses first on lower skilled occupations, or what's increasingly being referred to low wage occupations. And we do see a significant proportion of temporary and migrant labor in both Canada and Europe in that category of work. The second division that's commonly present is differentiations between seasonal or circular migration, where migrants may come for a period of time per year over several numbers of years, so say 6 months per year to work in a certain industry. This is often employed in agriculture. And so we have in Canada the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program that operates on that model, with migrants coming for up to 8 months per year to work in various agricultural sectors and then return to their home country, but can continue their participation in the program over a substantial number of years. We also see similar use of seasonal migrant worker programs in the agricultural sector in Europe, with a similar model of workers coming for a particular number of months per year over perhaps a substantial number of years overall. And so in both of these cases, migrants tend to come from abroad, particularly from countries that are relatively economically disadvantaged or developing compared to the destination countries they come and work in. In Canada, then, we also have a more general temporary foreign worker program where we bring in foreign nationals to work in industries like hospitality, caregiving, construction, and food services. Unlike Canada, in Europe currently, we see a higher proportion of migrants in these kinds of industries being recruited from other European member states, particularly with migration occurring from east to west. But what we see in terms of similarities, even with common EU citizenship, is a number of problematic practices, labor rights abuses, and vulnerability that migrant workers experience in Europe, even with intra-EU migration.
In the past several years, in both various European countries and Canada, we've seen a number of high-profile cases where foreign workers, temporary workers, have been exploited by their employers. And this, I think, has really raised questions about the protections that are enjoyed by these workers. So how effective have the protections for temporary and migrant workers been in Canada and Europe? And what are the kind of factors that contribute to exploitation of these workers?
So first, in terms of legal rights and protections that are available to migrant workers in both Canada and Europe, migrant workers enjoy many or most of the same protections as domestic workers would. So when we look at labor and employment law, for example, migrant workers, whether they are in Europe EU citizens or third country nationals, and with Canada, if they're non-residents and non-citizens of Canada, still enjoy all of the, or are intended to enjoy all of the applicable labor and employment laws respecting minimum wage, minimum working conditions, occupational health and safety issues. What we see in practice, unfortunately, is that in both contexts, and regardless of citizenship, so this has been noted in respect of intra-EU migration as well, is that migrant workers are very constrained in their ability to access legal remedies or assert their legal rights when they are facing abusive or unlawful treatment in respect of both more perhaps minor violations, such as wage violations, and especially in more serious situations of exploitation and abuse. The reason why migrant workers tend to be very constrained in their ability to do this is first the fact that legal mechanisms to address abusive or exploitative situations or other unlawful treatment are complaints driven. And migrant workers tend to have strong disincentives to complain or to assert their legal rights in their employment relationship because it puts their employment status in jeopardy, and for foreign nationals or third country nationals can put their immigration status in jeopardy where their work permit is tied to their specific employer and for a specific amount of time. And so this creates a strong disincentive for migrants to want to voice a complaint or assert their legal remedies.
In broader terms, in both the European and Canadian context, what have the impacts of temporary and migrant labor been on the sort of societal structure or societal environment and the labor market structure as well?
So this is something that we've definitely seen increasing social and political discourse around as we try to grapple with the place and future of temporary labor migration, particularly in lower skilled or low wage occupations. And what has happened over time as migrant workers have been consistently employed in certain industries, or there's been a persistent demand for migrant labor over a long period of time in certain industries of the labor market, such as agriculture, such as hospitality and food services, is that we've seen that the use of migrant labor has in many ways allowed or has the potential to allow working conditions and wages in those industries to remain static in somewhat of an artificial way, because we often see or hear a claim of job rejection by local workers in that migrant laborers are needed for these jobs in these industries because local workers are unwilling to accept the wages and working conditions. Whereas if there was not a ready or available pool of migrant laborers, there's potential that the wages and conditions in those markets and industries would have to be improved in order to sustain a domestic workforce. And so there's certainly the potential and the debate around to what extent migrant labor is artificially suppressing the improvement of conditions for workers. However, on the other side, it's often put forth that migrant labor is necessary, or that these jobs are necessary to be done under such conditions and at such wages in order for businesses and those industries to remain economically viable or competitive in an increasing global marketplace. So there's definitely a lot of debate and concern over the presence and long-term use of migrant labor in these markets and what impact that will have or does have over the long term. In terms of broader social impacts, of course, we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years, especially with the economic downturn and austerity measures, that migrant workers have become a more prominent target, perhaps, in political and social discourse that feeds into larger debates on immigration and anti-migration sentiments that are arising in various pockets, both in Canada and Europe.